New Orleans was really at about the height of its golden age then, the height of its boom. For the previous 20 years, it had been doubling its population about every decade or so. It had a population of about 80,000. In 1837, it would push up to over 100,000 by 1840. It was still the state capital of Louisiana. The State House was located on Canal Street in the 900 block where the Roosevelt Hotel is today. There was a big garden there. They called it State House Square. And it was kind of on the fringes of the city at that time. You know, New Orleans had to grow close to the river because, you know, our highest ground, as we all know, is closest to the Mississippi River. As you go back from the river, the ground gets lower and lower. So the city tended to grow within about a mile or so of the river, not much more than that. The city was booming, and there were some pretty big buildings going up in the city at that time. On Washington's birthday of 1837, just a couple of weeks after the Daily Picayune hit the streets, the St. Charles Hotel opened. And this was a very, very grand building. This was one of the first luxury hotels in the United States. It was in the what's now the 200 block of St. Charles, where Place St. Charles is located. The same year, construction began on the St. Louis Hotel, which is where the Royal Orleans is in the French Quarter, and of course that was the French hotel. The St. Charles was the American hotel, the St. Louis was the French hotel, so there was a great deal of competition between the two. In New Orleans, water was obtained from cisterns. Prior to that, people were using wells, but the soil was so sewage saturated that it was actually much cleaner and much safer to get it out of cisterns. There was no plumbing, there was no sewage disposal in the city at all, other than privies in people's backyards, and there were laws concerning the placement of privies and such, trying to keep the city, at least in some way, clean. And you know, sweet smelling was the word that, you know, people would often use, but there's usually a great deal of effluvia and miasmas and whatever else that people saw. And what we were hit by was yellow fever. Beginning in the 18th century, yellow fever began coming into New Orleans. And New Orleans was not alone. You know, Philadelphia had yellow fever epidemics, New York had them, Washington had them. So we weren't alone in having them. It's just that they tended to seem a little bit worse here because they would last longer into the year. Nobody knew what caused yellow fever. You know, they didn't realize that mosquitoes carried it. They're beginning to think that undrained soil was the reason yellow fever was so bad here. And of course, you had supposedly heat, warm summer air acting on undrained, filthy soil, and that would create yellow fever. Yellow fever could come from one year to the next. Sometimes, you know, it's like hurricane season today. One year you might have a bad season, another season you might have absolutely nothing. In 1836, New Orleans reportedly had 5 deaths from yellow fever. In 1837, we had 1,300 deaths as an estimated number. That was a pretty sizable number in a city of 80,000. New Orleans was vying with New York as the major financial center of the United States. And there were some years in the 1830s where New Orleans actually outranked New York as the major banking center of the United States. You have to remember then, there wasn't that big a difference in population. New Orleans had about 80,000, New York had 275, 300,000 at that time. So they were closer in size. And of course, New Orleans was really the only banking center in the South. When you look at the size of other cities and other banking centers in the South, they really hardly existed. We were it. So we had a very, very wide market, a very, very wide area to lend and bring in money.